My brother and sister stole my inheritance, taking the family house, and everything valuable, leaving me only what they considered worthless junk. You know, there are moments in life when you think you're standing at a crossroads, only to realize the crossroads is just the same old broken road you've been walking your whole damn life. I'm about to turn 35, and honestly, I've never been what you'd call successful. No flashy career. No kids. Hell, I don't even own my own place. Just Bobby Peterson. Jack of all trades. Master of absolutely nothing. I've been like that Swiss Army knife with all the blades dulled down to useless nubs. Security guard at a warehouse where the biggest threat was finding a mouse in the break room. Night shift attendant at a gas station where the most exciting thing was figuring out which coffee maker actually worked. Even cleaned up at those little local arenas where the smell of stale popcorn became my daily routine. Dad used to say something that stuck with me, though it took me years to get it. He'd look at me with those tired eyes and say, "Even if you never amount to much, son, stick close to where miracles happen." Back then, I laughed it off. Now I realize he was a prophet, not the biblical kind, the pure Peterson-style kind. See, my mom passed away last spring. Cancer got her fast and brutal, the way it usually goes. She died without a will because she genuinely believed her 3 grown children would figure things out like reasonable adults. Yeah, right? Especially when 2 of those children are twins who graduated law school, opened their own practice, and have always operated like some kind of legal tag team. And then there's me, Bobby, the weird third wheel who never quite fit into their well-oiled machine. Growing up, I was always the one looking in from the outside. While Marcus and Jennifer were studying for their SATs, I was in the garage with Dad, learning how to fix things that probably didn't need fixing. While they were winning debate trophies, I was working part-time jobs to help with grocery money. Dad matching everything, backpacks, ambitions, that twin telepathy thing that made me feel like I was watching their lives through bulletproof glass. Mom used to insist we were all equal in her eyes. Family photos always told a different story, though. I'd end up looking like the neighbor kid who wandered into the wrong picture. The day after Mom's funeral, Marcus and Jennifer showed up at my studio apartment like a couple of sharks in expensive black suits. They looked completely out of place in my cramped little space with its secondhand furniture and water stains on the ceiling. Marcus had that serious look people get when they're about to do something they know is wrong, but are convinced themselves it's necessary. He put his hand on my shoulder, checking to see if I might fall apart right there on the spot. "Bobby," he said, "we need to get these papers signed. Estate stuff. Legal formalities. You trust us, right?" I remember gripping that pen like it was going to bite me. My fingers were trembling. Jennifer stood there with that cold, sympathetic smile she perfected in law school. The documents were already drawn up, neat and official looking. They spoke in that lawyer language that sounds important but feels slippery, like trying to hold on to a wet bar of soap. They explained it was just about dividing up personal belongings and household items. Who gets what furniture, that kind of thing. And I trusted them, like an absolute fool. I signed those papers without reading the fine print. My head was still swimming in that fog of grief, where everything feels like it's happening underwater. My Uncle Pete, who ran a small farm outside town, used to say something that haunts me now. "Never sign anything you don't understand, Bobby. Lawyers are like mechanics. They'll fix what ain't broken if it means more money in their pocket." I should have listened to the farmer instead of the lawyers. But grief makes you stupid. Makes you desperate for someone else to handle the complicated stuff. 3 weeks later, I drove to Mom's house just to collect some personal items. Photo albums. Maybe Dad's old toolbox. Something to help me remember that I'd actually belonged somewhere once. Instead, I got sucker punched by a bright yellow "for sale" sign stabbed into the front yard like a grave marker. My heart didn't just sink. It straight up fell to the floor and landed somewhere around my ankles. I stood there staring at that sign, feeling like I just walked into the wrong movie. The kind where the main character finds out his whole life has been a lie. I called Marcus immediately. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. "Wait, what do you mean for sale?" I asked, heart pounding in my throat. "Oh, hey, Bob," he said, and I could hear him typing in the background like this was just another Tuesday. Yeah, we decided not to mess around with the property. You signed off on it, remember? You get the personal belongings and household items. We handle the real estate, just like the papers said. But I thought we were going to discuss everything first. I said, my voice cracking. I didn't know you meant selling it immediately. You signed the documents, Bob. You agreed to waive your claim to property in exchange for the contents. It's all legal. Except I never really understood what I was signing. I thought it was just some formality about who gets what furniture. But apparently, buried in all that legal paperwork I'd signed like a trusting idiot, was my agreement to let them have the house while I got stuck with the leftovers. 20 minutes later, they showed up at the house with their fake sympathy. Jennifer was wearing designer sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and Marcus had his phone out like he was already late for something more important. "We got everything sorted for you in the garage," Jennifer said, leading me around back like she was giving a tour. "All the sentimental stuff, photo albums, Dad's old tools, some kitchen appliances, a few pieces of furniture we don't need. You know, the things that matter to you." Marcus checked his watch. "Take this stuff, or we're just going to throw it all away. The new owners want to close fast, and we can't have junk sitting around." That's when I finally lost it. "Junk," I said, my voice getting louder. "This is 35 years of our family, Marcus, and you tricked me into signing away the house." Jennifer rolled her eyes behind those designer sunglasses. "We didn't trick you, Bobby. You signed the papers. It's not our fault you didn't read them. You told me it was just about dividing up furniture. Maybe this will teach you to actually read documents before you sign them," Marcus said, not even looking up from his phone. "You're 35, Bob. Time to start acting like an adult." "Yeah," Jennifer added with that fake concerned tone. "You can't blame us for your own mistakes. We're lawyers, not babysitters." Funny thing, I didn't mean to record any of this. I've been trying to call my buddy Dave, but my thumb hit the record button instead. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing. I stood there in that garage, surrounded by 35 years of family history that they reduced to junk. They'd already cherry-picked everything valuable, Mom's jewelry, the good furniture, Dad's decent tools. What was left looked like the aftermath of a garage sale nobody wanted to attend. They betrayed me. Cleanly, legally, and without a single ounce of remorse. It was like finding out your whole family was actually a business partnership, and you were the only one who didn't get the memo about profit margins. I loaded those boxes into my beat-up Ford pickup, feeling like I was stealing my own memories. The truck sagged under the weight of what they considered worthless. As I drove away, I watched the house shrink in my rearview mirror until it was just another building on a street I used to call home. That night, I sat in my studio apartment surrounded by what they generously call my inheritance. Photo albums with pictures of birthday parties where I was always slightly out of frame. Dad's old work shirts that still smelled like motor oil and broken dreams. Mom's collection of ceramic angels that she'd insisted were protecting our family. Some protection. But there was one box I hadn't opened yet. An old cardboard thing that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Clinton administration. Covered in dust and spider webs, forgotten in the corner of the garage. At the time, I figured it was probably just more of Dad's random treasures. Old spark plugs, rusted tools, maybe some expired paint cans. The man never threw anything away if he thought it might be useful someday. I almost didn't bother opening it. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and honestly pretty close to just burning everything and starting over somewhere else. Maybe Arizona. I'd heard good things about Arizona. Low humidity, cheap rent, and nobody knows your family history. But something about that box nagged at me. Maybe it was because it was the only thing they'd packed separately from everything else. Or maybe it was just that stubborn Peterson streak that makes us pick at things until they either fix or break completely. I had no idea that buried under the dust and cobwebs was something small and round that would make the entire world look at me differently. Not just my financial situation, though that would change dramatically. Not just my relationship with my siblings, though that was about to get very interesting. But my entire understanding of who my father was, and what our family had actually been carrying around all these years. Among all that worthless junk they'd so generously allowed me to keep was a forgotten object that would turn out to be the only truth my dad ever told. A key to my future. Hidden in the past I thought I knew. That old cardboard box from the garage had been staring at me for 3 days. Every time I walked past it, sitting there in the corner of my studio apartment like some kind of dusty time capsule, I'd tell myself I'd deal with it later. But later kept turning into tomorrow, and tomorrow kept turning into another excuse to avoid facing whatever memories were buried inside. Finally, on a rainy Thursday night when I had nothing better to do than feel sorry for myself, I opened it. At the bottom, buried under 20 years of cobwebs and mouse droppings, my fingers touched something hard and round. A hockey puck, old and beaten up. At first, I almost tossed it aside with the rest of Dad's random garage treasures. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the way it fell in my hand, heavier than I expected. Or maybe it was that stubborn Peterson gene that makes us hold on to things way longer than we should. I wiped off the dust with my sleeve, and that's when I saw it clearly. An autograph, faded but still visible. My heart started doing this weird stuttering thing. Then I found the photo, tucked underneath some old bills, yellow with age and slightly cracked at the corners. There I was, maybe 7 years old, sitting on Dad's shoulders at what looked like a hockey arena. He was grinning that goofy smile of his, holding up this exact same puck like it was a holy grail. I was wearing a Team USA jersey that was way too big for me, looking happier than I'd ever seen myself in any family photo. No idea who took it. Maybe some stranger Dad shoved the camera at. But there it was. Proof, or at least a piece of the myth. The world just stopped for a second. I remember that day. Sort of. See, my dad was what you might call a professional dreamer. The kind of guy who could turn a trip to the grocery store into an epic adventure story. He drove trucks for a living, hauling freight across the Midwest. But his real passion was hockey. Not playing it. Dad could barely stand on ice skates. But watching it, that man lived and breathed hockey like it was religion. In 1980, he was supposed to be on some long-haul run to California. Good money, overtime pay, the kind of job that could help us catch up on the mortgage payments. Instead, he blew every penny he had on a ticket to Lake Placid for the Winter Olympics. Mom was furious. I mean, absolutely nuclear. Here they were, barely scraping by, and Dad decides to blow their savings on what she called his hockey fantasy. But Dad was like a kid who just discovered Disneyland was real. He came back 3 days later looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Literally. His face was bruised, his clothes were torn, and he reeked of cheap beer and celebration. But he was carrying this puck, holding it like it contained the secrets of the universe. According to Dad, he'd somehow ended up in the middle of the most incredible upset in sports history. The miracle on ice, they called it later. A bunch of college kids and amateurs from the U.S. hockey team had just beaten the Soviet Union, the same team that had dominated international hockey for decades. It was like David slaying Goliath, except David was wearing skates and had a mullet. Dad swore that after the game, one of the players, Mike Iruzon, the captain who scored the winning goal, had personally handed him this puck, a piece of history. Dad called it a chunk of the American dream made real. We kids just rolled our eyes. Dad was always coming home with stories that sounded too good to be true. The time he supposedly helped a famous country singer change a flat tire. The night he claimed he arm wrestled a professional wrestler at a truck stop. The afternoon he swore he'd seen a UFO over Nebraska. Who believes stories like that? Especially when they're coming from a guy who sometimes came home smelling like Jack Daniels and disappointment. But Dad never stopped telling that hockey story. Every time he'd had a few beers, out would come the tale of how he'd witnessed the greatest upset in sports history and walked away with a piece of it. As I sat there holding that puck, something inside me shifted. Something I'd buried under years of disappointment and practical thinking. Maybe Dad wasn't just a dreamer. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been telling the truth all along. Sometimes the most honest stories hide behind the most unbelievable tales. I started doing what any reasonable person does when they're trying to figure out if their dead father was a liar or a prophet. I went to Google. First hit, 1980 Olympic hockey memorabilia reaches record prices at auction. Second hit, vintage game-used hockey puck sells for $820,000 at heritage auctions. My brain literally exploded. $820,000 for a hockey puck, for what might be sitting in my lap right at that very moment. That's when I knew I had to find out the truth. Not just for the money. Though let's be honest, 800 grand would solve a lot of my problems. But for Dad, for that goofy smile in the photo, for every time he'd told that story and we'd rolled our eyes. I'd never been much of a social media guy. Facebook felt like a high school reunion that never ended, and Twitter was just people yelling at each other about everything and nothing. But desperation makes you do stupid things. So I created a Reddit account and found a group called Hockey Collectors. The post I wrote was probably the most pathetic thing ever posted on the internet, which is saying something. I uploaded a blurry photo of the puck and basically wrote a sob story about my dead dad and his crazy hockey tale. I figured maybe someone could tell me if I was holding treasure or just another piece of garage sale junk. The responses started trickling in within a few hours. Most were the usual internet helpfulness. Everything from fake as a $3 bill to that could be worth millions. But then I got a private message that made my heart skip a beat. It was from someone with the username LibraryJess88. The message was short and sweet. Bobby Peterson from Maple Street. This is Jesse, from the neighborhood. I think I can help you figure this out. Jesse Martinez. Holy crap. I hadn't thought about Jessie in years, but seeing her name brought back a flood of memories. She lived 3 houses down from us growing up, and I'd had the biggest crush on her throughout high school. We'd been friends, sort of. I'd helped her fix her car a few times, and she'd always been nice to me in that way pretty girls are nice to guys they have absolutely no romantic interest in. I'd always wanted to ask her out, but never had the guts. She was smart, funny, and way out of my league. Plus, I was always working some dead-end job and living paycheck to paycheck. What could I possibly offer someone like Jessie? Turns out, Jessie worked at the local library now, specifically in their media archives. She'd specialized in sports history and had access to databases and resources that most people never even knew existed. When she saw my post about the 1980 Olympics, something clicked. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I spent way too much time getting ready, which was ridiculous since I was supposedly there to talk about a hockey puck, not rekindle some ancient crush. But when Jessie walked in, I realized some things never change. She looked exactly like I remembered, only better, more confident. She had this way of moving that suggested she knew exactly who she was and what she was doing with her life. I, on the other hand, was sitting there with sweaty palms and a 20-year-old hockey puck in a plastic bag, feeling like the same awkward loser I'd always been. But Jessie smiled when she saw me, and it was genuine, not the polite smile you give to someone you barely remember, but the warm smile you give to an old friend you're actually happy to see. We ordered coffee, and I showed her the puck. She held it carefully, turning it over in her hands like she was examining a piece of ancient pottery. Her fingers traced a faded autograph, and I could see her mind working. Then she looked at me with these bright, curious eyes and said something that changed everything. She told me she remembered my dad's story. Not just remembered it, but had always wondered if it might be true. Turns out, Dad used to tell that Lake Placid story to anyone who'd listen at Murphy's bar down on 5th Street. Her own father was a regular there too, and he'd come home talking about this crazy truck driver who claimed he had a piece of Olympic history sitting in his garage. Apparently, she'd done some research on the 1980 Olympics for a project in college, and had come across some footage that made her think about Dad's tale. Made her wonder if the drunk guy at Murphy's might have actually been telling the truth. The way she talked about it, with genuine excitement and scientific curiosity, made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely insane for thinking this might be real. Here was someone who actually took the idea seriously. Someone who didn't look at me like I was chasing windmills or living in Fantasyland. She suggested we do some digging together. Real research, archive footage, newspaper accounts, official records. If Dad's story was true, there would be evidence. There had to be. I found myself agreeing before my brain could come up with all the reasons why this was probably a waste of time. As we sat there making plans, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had a purpose, something worth pursuing, and I wasn't doing it alone. Jessie looked at me, then at the puck, and her words hit me like a lightning bolt. She said maybe, just maybe, my father hadn't been the dreamer we'd all thought he was. Maybe he'd been telling the truth all along, and we'd just been too practical, too skeptical, too afraid to believe. What if this beaten-up piece of rubber really was a piece of history? The possibility hung in the air between us like electricity. Could two people, a down-on-his-luck nobody and a library archivist, actually uncover a truth that had been sitting in a dusty garage box for decades? Was this puck really the key to something bigger than just old memories? Or was this just another Peterson delusion, something I was desperately trying to make real, because I needed it to be? But looking at Jessie's face, seeing the genuine excitement in her eyes, I knew we had to find out. I didn't know if we'd find truth or just ghosts, but I knew this, we had to dig. Our investigation started at the library like a couple of amateur detectives trying to crack the case of the century. Jessie had access to databases I'd never even heard of, archives that went back decades, and a research system that made Google look like a kid's toy. She dove into those files like she was mining for gold, while I played the role of faithful sidekick, squinting at old newspaper microfilm until my eyes felt like they were bleeding. We spent 3 solid days digging through everything we could find about the 1980 Olympics. Sports Illustrated back issues, local newspaper coverage, official Olympic records. But the real breakthrough came when Jessie suggested something that seemed almost too obvious. She looked up from a stack of printouts, pushed her hair back from her face, and said we should check YouTube. YouTube? Who would have thought the most valuable evidence would be sitting right next to cat videos and cooking tutorials? We started with the official footage, the stuff everyone's seen a million times. Al Michaels asking if we believed in miracles, the team celebration, the medal ceremony with grown men crying like babies. But Jessie had this theory that the real gold was in the amateur footage, the stuff shot by regular fans in the stands. Turns out, she was absolutely right. We found dozens of videos uploaded by people who'd been at Lake Placid that night. Grainy footage shot on old cameras, shaky and blurry, but filled with this raw energy that the professional broadcasts somehow missed. You could feel the electricity in those amateur clips, the genuine shock and joy of people witnessing something they knew they'd never see again. For hours, we sat side by side at her desk, going through video after video. Our shoulders kept bumping as we leaned in to get a better look at the screen. Every time it happened, I'd get this little jolt that had nothing to do with hockey and everything to do with the fact that Jessie Martinez was sitting close enough that I could smell her shampoo. Then, at 12:37 of a video labeled My Dad's Olympic Memory 1980 Second Period Crowd Shots, Jessie suddenly went completely still. Her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. She hit pause, so fast I thought she'd broken the mouse. On the screen was a man in a beige coat, standing near the boards. He had a beard, looked to be in his 30s, and was holding what appeared to be a beer and jumping up and down like a maniac. Just another excited fan in a sea of excited fans. But then Mike Eruzione, number 21, the guy who'd scored the winning goal, skated over the boards during a break in play, and he handed something to man in the beige coat. Jessie turned to look at me, and her eyes were as wide as dinner plates. Her voice was barely a whisper when she asked if that man looked familiar to me. I stared at the screen. The video quality was terrible, and the guy was partially blocked by other fans, but there was something about the way he moved, the way he held his shoulders, that made my stomach drop. It was my father, 28 years old, drunk on cheap beer and American pride, catching a piece of history from a genuine American hero. My entire world flipped upside down again. This wasn't some crazy story told by a guy who'd had too many beers. This wasn't wishful thinking or false memory. This was right there on the screen, recorded for posterity by some random fan's dad, who probably had no idea he was documenting one of the most important moments of my life. Dad hadn't been lying. He'd been telling the truth all along, and we'd just been too skeptical, too practical, too afraid to believe that something that incredible could actually happen to someone like us. We must have watched that 10-second clip about 50 times. Jesse enhanced it, slowed it down, zoomed in as much as the video quality would allow. Each time we watched it, I became more certain. That was my dad. That was really him. Jesse suggested we clip that section and post it on some hockey forums to see if anyone else could confirm what we were seeing. With trembling hands, I created accounts on HockeyDB, Ice Collectors, and Vintage Hockey forums. We uploaded the clip with a simple question: can anyone identify what's happening in this exchange? The responses came flooding in like snow in a January blizzard. Within an hour, we had dozens of replies. Hockey historians, memorabilia experts, people who'd been at that game, collectors who knew more about the 1980 Olympics than the players themselves. The consensus was overwhelming and unanimous. They all recognized the moment. They all confirmed what we were seeing. Mike Eruzione had indeed handed something to a fan during that break in play. Multiple people remembered it happening. Some had even wondered for years what had become of whatever he'd given away. One response in particular made my hands shake. It was from a collector in Denver who went by Ice Vintage 88. He said that if the puck in our possession was genuinely from that exchange, and if it had Eruzione's authentic signature, we were looking at a 7-figure item. Maybe more. 7 figures. As in over $1 million. My first reaction was to laugh. I actually started giggling like an idiot sitting there in the library. Jesse looked at me like I'd lost my mind, which I probably had. Here I was, Bobby Peterson, the guy who counted change to buy gas, suddenly talking about millions of dollars. The same guy who'd been eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week was now discussing 7-figure valuations like it was normal conversation. The same brothers who told me I was getting worthless junk had just handed me what might be the most valuable piece of sports memorabilia in existence. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. I kept thinking about their smug faces when they called it sentimental garbage. Marcus checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Jennifer in those designer sunglasses treated me like a charity case. None of them had ever mentioned that sentimental junk could be worth more than most people's houses. But we still needed professional authentication. All the forum enthusiasm in the world wouldn't mean anything if we couldn't prove the puck was genuine. Jesse suggested we contact some of the collectors who'd responded, see if they could point us toward reputable authentication services. The more we researched, the more complicated it became. Apparently, the sports memorabilia world was like a minefield of forgeries, fake certificates, and con artists. One wrong step, and you could end up with a worthless piece of rubber and an expensive lesson in gullibility. But we also learned that legitimate authentication was possible. There were experts who specialized in Olympic memorabilia. People who could analyze everything from the rubber composition to the ink chemistry of autographs. Scientific analysis that could prove authenticity beyond any reasonable doubt. The process would take weeks and cost a few $1,000s. Money I definitely didn't have. But Jessie offered to help cover the costs. She said she believed in the story, believed in what we'd found, and wanted to see it through to the end. Sitting there in that library, surrounded by research and evidence and the possibility of a completely different future, I realized something had changed between us. This wasn't just about the puck anymore. This wasn't just about proving my dad had been telling the truth, or about potentially life-changing money. This was about 2 people who'd found something together, something neither of us could have discovered alone. Jessie looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Part excitement, part nervousness, part something else entirely. She said she'd never been part of anything like this before, never been involved in uncovering a mystery that could change someone's entire life. I told her I'd never had anyone believe in me the way she did. Never had someone willing to dig through archives and spend their own money just to help me find the truth. The silence that followed was the kind that feels heavy with possibility. Like we were standing at the edge of something much bigger than either of us had expected when we'd first sat down with that dusty old puck. But then Jessie's phone buzzed with another foreign notification, and we were back to business. More hockey experts weighing in on our video. More confirmation that what we'd found was potentially extraordinary. One message stood out from the rest. It was from someone claiming to have been at Lake Placid that night, sitting just a few sections away from where our video was shot. This person remembered the exchange, remembered thinking it was strange that Eruzion would give something away during the game, remembered wondering what had happened to that lucky fan, and whatever he'd received. They offered to help us authenticate our find, said they had connections in the memorabilia world, people who could fast-track the verification process if we were serious about pursuing it. We were serious, dead serious. As we packed up our research that night, preparing to take the next step in what was starting to feel like the adventure of a lifetime, one question kept running through my mind. Was this puck really the same one from that incredible moment? Would the experts confirm its authenticity? And would that faded signature prove to be genuine? If so, exactly how much was this piece of my father's truth worth? And what was I, Bobby Peterson, a guy without a career or even a decent place to live, going to do with the kind of money that could fall into my lap? The tension was building because this wasn't just about memories anymore. This was about an entirely new life. The moment of truth came when Jesse and I finally shipped that puck off to the authentication experts. 3 weeks of waiting that felt like 3 years. Every day, I'd check my phone about 50 times, waiting for the call that would either validate everything we discovered or crush our dreams into expensive dust. Jessie was incredible during those weeks. She'd call every evening to check on me, and we'd end up talking for hours about everything except the puck. Turns out, we had a lot more in common than I'd ever realized back in high school. When my phone finally rang, I was in the middle of my Thursday shift at the gas station, restocking energy drinks and trying not to think about the fact that my entire future was sitting in some lab, being analyzed by people I'd never met. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, almost boring, but the words that came out of his mouth sounded like a victory anthem. He confirmed it. Everything. The puck was authentic, manufactured in 1980, used in Olympic competition. The autograph was genuine Mike Eruzion, signed with the exact type of pen they use at Lake Placid. Even the video footage we provided helped corroborate the chain of custody. This wasn't just any old hockey puck. This was a piece of Miracle on Ice, personally handed to my father by an American hero, authenticated beyond any reasonable doubt. I called Jesse immediately, my hands shaking so bad I could barely dial. When I told her the news, she actually started crying. Happy tears, she assured me, but tears nonetheless. We were both laughing and crying at the same time, like a couple of lunatics who just won the lottery, which, in a way, we had. The next step was finding the right auction house. Heritage Auctions specialize in high-end sports memorabilia, and when we contacted them with our authentication documents, they practically fell over themselves to handle the sale. They suggested a private auction with pre-qualified bidders. The kind of event where serious collectors bring serious money, and everything gets handled with white gloves and hushed voices. The auction was held in a conference room that looked like something out of a James Bond movie, rich with paneling, leather chairs, and an atmosphere so thick with money you could practically taste it. Jesse and I sat in the back, trying to look like we belonged there among the collectors and museum representatives. I was wearing the only decent suit I owned, a cheap thing I'd worn at interviews where I smiled too hard and got told I wasn't quite the right fit. Jessie looked amazing, confident, and professional in a way that made me proud to be sitting next to her. The bidding started at $500,000. Within minutes, it was over $1 million. By the 10-minute mark, we were in uncharted territory. Museums were bidding against private collectors. Corporate sponsors were jumping in. Even a rep from Smithsonian made a call-in bid before bowing out at $2 million. The energy in that room was electric, like watching gladiators fight, except the weapons were checkbooks, and the prize was a piece of American history. When the hammer finally came down, the number on the board made my brain short-circuit. $3.2 million. The buyer was a consortium representing the National Sports Heritage Foundation. They planned to display the puck in a traveling exhibit about Olympic history, ensuring that millions of Americans would see this piece of the Miracle on Ice. I couldn't believe it. Bobby Peterson, the guy who'd been counting quarters for gas money, had just sold a piece of rubber for more than most people make in their entire lives. Jesse grabbed my hand as the gavel fell, and for a moment, I forgot we were in a room full of strangers. The auction house took their commission. Taxes would take another chunk. But even after all the fees and paperwork, I was looking at more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But the real satisfaction wasn't about the money. It was about being right. About my father being right. About a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for over 40 years, waiting for someone to believe enough to dig for the evidence. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when someone goes from broke to millionaire overnight. The local newspaper ran a story. Social media picked it up. Within a week, I was getting calls from reporters, documentary filmmakers, and random people wanting to share their own family legends about famous artifacts hidden in attics and garages. But the call I was really waiting for came exactly 3 weeks after the auction results went public. It wasn't a phone call, actually. It was a letter. Official law firm letterhead, my brother's practice, requesting a meeting to discuss resolving some family disagreements. For about 10 seconds, I wonder if maybe I'd been wrong about them. Maybe they really had made an honest mistake with the estate paperwork. Maybe they were reaching out to apologize and make things right. Then they showed up at my apartment, Marcus and Jennifer, looking exactly like they had that day at the garage, except now they weren't quite as confident, still wearing expensive suits, still carrying themselves like they owned the world, but there was something different in their eyes, something that looked a lot like desperation. They started with the same fake smiles and family loyalty speech they'd used before. Marcus even put his hand on my shoulder again, like we were old buddies sharing a beer. Jennifer went into full lawyer mode, talking about family bonds and shared heritage, how the puck was really part of Mom's estate, technically speaking, how any reasonable person would want to share such an incredible windfall with their siblings. They made it sound like keeping the money would be selfish, unnatural, practically immoral. I listened to their whole performance, nodding along like I was actually considering their proposal. They offered to split the proceeds 3 ways, minus their legal fees for handling the complexities. Of course, very generous of them, considering they'd already stolen everything else. When they finished their pitch, I looked at both of them for a long moment. These people who'd raised me, who'd shared Christmas mornings and family vacations, who'd turned their backs on me the moment money was involved. Then I pulled out my phone. I asked them if they remembered our conversation at the garage, that day when they'd so generously allowed me to take the junk they didn't want. They looked confused, probably wondering why I was bringing up ancient history when we had millions to discuss. I hit play on a recording I'd accidentally made that day. Their own voices filled my small apartment, crystal clear and completely damning. Marcus telling me to take the stuff, or they'd throw it all away. Jennifer dismissing everything as sentimental garbage. Both of them making it perfectly clear that they consider these items worthless and beneath their notice. Watching their faces change as they heard their own words was absolutely priceless. The confusion turned to recognition. Recognition turned to panic. And panic turned to the kind of desperate anger that comes when smart people realize they've been outsmarted by someone they've always underestimated. Marcus started talking about legal challenges and inheritance law. Jennifer mentioned something about undue influence and family obligations. They both seemed to think that yelling louder would somehow change the fact that they'd been caught in their own trap. But I wasn't the same Bobby Peterson who'd signed those papers in his grief fog anymore. I wasn't the third wheel, the family screw-up, the guy who'd accept whatever scraps they decided to throw him. I told them that family doesn't trick each other the way they tricked me. Real family doesn't steal a childhood home and then act like they're doing you a favor. Real family doesn't dismiss your inheritance as garbage and then demand a cut when it turns out to be valuable. The recording had captured everything. Their attitudes, their dismissiveness, their complete lack of respect for me or for Dad's memory. Justice, like good coffee, sometimes takes a while to brew, but the taste is worth the wait. They threatened lawsuits, of course. Claimed they'd fight me in court for years. But we all knew they didn't have a case. The paperwork was ironclad. The recording was devastating. And any jury would side with the guy who'd been cheated out of his family home by his own siblings. After about an hour of increasingly desperate legal threats, they finally gave up and left. I watched them walk away from my apartment building. These two people who'd spent their whole lives thinking they were smarter than everyone else, finally realizing that sometimes the joke is on the joker. The money was mine. The vindication was sweet. But what came next was the real question that kept me awake at night. I was Bobby Peterson, former nobody, now millionaire. The same guy who used to stress about making rent was now deciding what to do with more money than most people see in their lifetime. Would I blow it all on cars and vacations like some lottery winner cautionary tale? Or would I find a way to invest it in something meaningful? And then there was Jessie. She'd been with me when I was worth nothing, when my biggest asset was a beat-up Ford truck and a collection of unpaid bills. She believed in me and my crazy father's story when nobody else would. She put her own money and reputation on the line to help me find the truth. Now that I had everything, would she still want to be part of my life? Would success change just the way it changes so many people? Would money make our relationship stronger, or would it complicate everything we built together? This wasn't just a victory. This wasn't just about proving my father right, or getting revenge on my siblings. This was the beginning of an entirely new life. You know, when you suddenly have $3.2 million sitting in your bank account, the first thought that crosses your mind is probably Ferrari, private jet, maybe a beach house in the Caribbean. Live it up like some lottery winner who's about to blow everything on champagne and bad decisions. But I'm Bobby Peterson, and I've never done anything the easy way in my life. Wasn't about to start now. The first thing I did was buy a house. Not a mansion. Not some ridiculous palace with gold toilets and a swimming pool shaped like a guitar. Just a nice, comfortable place with a yard big enough for a barbecue and rooms that didn't echo when you walked through them. And yes, I bought it for Jessie and me. Together. Turns out, she'd been waiting for me to make a move for longer than I'd ever imagined. All those years in high school, when I thought she was out of my league, she was actually wondering why I never asked her out. All those times I figured she deserved someone better. She was hoping I'd get the courage to take a chance. Life isn't a race, right? The important thing is crossing the finish line with the right people. And Jessie was definitely the right person. I proposed to her in the most Bobby Peterson way possible. We were sitting in my old studio apartment, going through the last of the paperwork from the auction, when I just looked at her and realized I couldn't imagine doing any of this without her. No fancy restaurant, no romantic beach sunset, just two people surrounded by legal documents and empty pizza boxes. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. We got married 6 months later, in a small ceremony at the local community center, the same place where they used to hold town halls and high school graduation parties. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. Just family and friends celebrating two people who'd found something real in the middle of all the craziness. But buying a house and getting married wasn't enough. I needed something more. Something that would represent everything that had happened, everything I'd learned, everything I'd become. I needed my own last shot. That's when I remembered the old Met Center. It used to be a hockey arena back in the day, nothing major league, but it hosted local teams and high school championships. The place had been sitting empty for years, partially converted to warehouse space, slowly falling apart while the city argued about what to do with it. I found out about the opportunity through pure luck. Danny Kowalski, a guy I'd worked with at the gas station, had taken a job with the city planning department. Over beers one night, he mentioned that the current owner was looking to sell off sections of the building to anyone willing to take on the renovation costs. 400 square feet in what used to be the main entrance, the area where fans used to line up for tickets, where kids would press their faces against the glass trying to catch a glimpse of their heroes warming up. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The negotiations took 3 months. There were other interested buyers, mostly developers who wanted to tear the whole thing down and build condos. But I had something they didn't have: passion, persistence, and enough money to make a compelling offer without worrying about financing. Plus, I think the owner, an old guy named Frank Polanski whose father had originally built the arena, liked the idea of someone preserving a piece of the building's history rather than just bulldozing it for profit. We shook hands on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I became the owner of a small piece of hockey history. Transforming that space into a cafe was like rebuilding my entire life from the ground up. Every decision felt symbolic. Every detail mattered. I kept as much of the original architecture as possible. The old ticket windows became the ordering counter. The concrete floors got polished and sealed but kept their scuffs and stains, battle scars from decades of excited fans heading to their seats. The high ceilings with their exposed beams made the space feel bigger than it actually was, like you were still in an arena rather than just another coffee shop. The name was obvious from day one. Last Shot Cafe. But the real heart of the place wasn't the renovated architecture or the carefully sourced coffee beans. It was the walls. I covered them with photographs from the golden age of American hockey. Black and white images of players who looked like they'd stepped out of Norman Rockwell painting. Action shots from Olympic Games and championship matches. Pictures of fans celebrating victories and mourning defeats with equal passion. And right in the center, in a place of honor impossible to miss, I hung a blown-up still frame from that YouTube video. My father, 28 years old and drunk on American pride, receiving a piece of history from Mike Eruzione. Below the photo, I mounted a perfect replica of the puck. The original was safely stored in a climate control case at the National Sports Heritage Foundation, touring the country and inspiring people who understood what miracles looked like. But the replica served a different purpose. Underneath it, I placed a simple brass plaque that read, "This is the puck they threw away," along with the person who found it. That was my message. To Marcus and Jennifer. To everyone who'd ever dismissed me as a family screw-up. To anyone who'd ever been told their dreams were worthless junk, not worth keeping. Victory isn't about having the most money or the biggest house or the fanciest car. Victory is about staying true to yourself when the whole world is telling you to be someone else. The cafe opened on a cold Thursday morning in March. I didn't advertise, didn't send out press releases, or invite local dignitaries for a ribbon cutting. I just unlocked the doors and started brewing coffee. By noon, there was a line out the door. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when that word involves a local guy who became a millionaire by proving his dead father wasn't crazy. People came for the story, but they kept coming back for the atmosphere. There's something magical about that space. Maybe it's the history soaked into the walls. Maybe it's the way the afternoon light filters through the old windows. Maybe it's just the satisfaction of drinking good coffee in a place that represents a triumph of persistence over cynicism. I can sit there in the morning before we open, before the first customer walks to the door, and I swear I can still smell the ghost of old ice, still hear the echo of cheers from crowds that filled those seats decades ago. It's not just walls and floors and ceiling. It's a monument to the past brought back to life by one small puck that nobody believed in. Jessie runs the business side of things. Turns out, all those years working in library archives gave her incredible organizational skills and attention to detail. She handles the books, manages the suppliers, and somehow makes sure we stay profitable without losing the soul of what we're trying to do. She's also 6 months pregnant with our first child. We found out on a Tuesday morning in June. She'd been feeling tired. Thought it was just the stress of getting the cafe established. But when the doctor confirmed what we'd both been hoping for, but afraid to say out loud, I realized that everything had come full circle. My kid is going to grow up knowing their grandfather's story was true. They're going to understand that sometimes the most unbelievable tales turn out to be the most honest. They'll learn that persistence and faith and a little bit of luck can transform your entire life, even when everyone around you thinks you're chasing fantasies. But most importantly, they'll learn that family isn't just about blood relations or legal documents or shared last names. Family is about the people who believe in you when you can't believe in yourself. About 6 months after the cafe opened, I got a letter from Jennifer. Not Marcus, just Jennifer. It was handwritten, which surprised me. 2 pages of careful cursive apologizing for everything that had happened, explaining how they'd gotten caught up in the legal complexities and lost sight of what really mattered. She asked if we could meet for coffee, said she wanted to make things right. I read that letter 3 times, sitting in my cafe, surrounded by the life I'd built from the ashes of the betrayal. And I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had sustained me through the darkest moments, the fury that had driven me to prove them wrong, had transformed into something quieter and more powerful. Peace, satisfaction, the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you become exactly who you were supposed to be. I wrote her back. One sentence. The coffee's always fresh at last shot. Stop by any time. She hasn't come yet. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. But the invitation stands. Because forgiveness isn't about them anymore. It's about me. It's about refusing to let their mistakes define my happiness. That puck was more than just a piece of rubber. It was everything I'd lost and everything I'd found. Faith, dignity, love, purpose. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But I'd argue that the best revenge is living authentically, building something meaningful from the pieces other people consider worthless. Maybe the point of life isn't to take everything you can get. Maybe the point is to hold on to who you are while everything around you tries to change you. Every morning, I unlock the doors of Last Shot Cafe and watch ordinary people start their day with coffee and conversation in a space that represents the extraordinary power of believing in something bigger than yourself. Everyone laughed when I took home that box of junk. Now that junk feeds me, houses me, and gives me a purpose that money alone never could. I named it Last Shot because sometimes the final chance is the only one that really counts. Sometimes the thing everyone throws away turns out to be the most valuable thing you'll ever find. This story doesn't end with just financial success. It ends with love, purpose, and victory over the kind of betrayal that could have destroyed a lesser person. Bobby Peterson, the same family screw-up who couldn't hold down a decent job, built his own empire from the trash his siblings left behind. And that, my friends, is what real miracles look like.